Green Book, 2018, is a cinematic masterpiece that delves into the complexity of racial relations, cultural differences, and personal transformation. Directed by Peter Farrelly, the film is based on the true story of an unlikely friendship between an African-American pianist, Dr. Don Shirley, and his white Italian-American driver, Tony Lip, set against the backdrop of 1960s America, a time of intense racial segregation and civil unrest. While the narrative appears to focus primarily on race and social issues, it transcends these themes by exploring the shared humanity between two individuals from vastly different backgrounds who come to understand and respect each other through their journey. At the heart of Green Book is the deep bond that forms between Dr. Shirley and Tony, two characters who at first glance would appear to have little in common. Tony Lip, portrayed by Viggo Mortensen, is a working-class Italian-American man from the Bronx, known for his rough demeanor and straightforward, no-nonsense approach to life. He is hired to drive Dr. Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali, on a concert tour through the American South. Dr. Shirley, a world-class concert pianist, is sophisticated, intellectual, and highly educated. Despite his success, Shirley is constantly reminded of the racial divide that persists in the country, particularly in the South, where segregation laws are in full effect. His personal and professional life is marked by the harsh realities of racism, which he faces regularly despite his remarkable achievements. The opening moments of the film set the stage for this unlikely pairing. Tony, who is struggling with financial problems, is offered a job as a driver for Dr. Shirley, a position that seems almost beneath him at first. Tony is initially unperturbed by the fact that the job requires him to drive a black man through the Deep South. His initial reaction is rooted in ignorance and a lack of awareness regarding the severity of racial tensions in the region. Tony's understanding of race is shaped largely by the environment in which he was raised, a working-class Italian neighborhood in New York, where he has little exposure to the world of African Americans, especially those, like Dr. Shirley, occupy an entirely different social and cultural sphere. Dr. Shirley, on the other hand, is initially reluctant to accept Tony's help. As a highly cultured and refined individual, Shirley is accustomed to a life of privilege and sophistication. He lives in a luxurious apartment in New York and is highly respected in his field. However, his professional success does not shield him from the racial discrimination that permeates society. Dr. Shirley, a man of dignity and grace, faces deep loneliness and isolation. Despite being a celebrated musician, he is often rejected by both black and white communities. Black people view him with suspicion because of his elite status, while white people fail to see beyond his race. This dual sense of rejection and alienation is an important aspect of Dr. Shirley's character and serves as a significant point of tension in the film. The first few days of the tour, which is marked by increasingly hostile environments, reveal the vast differences between the two men. Tony, at first, treats the job as merely a way to earn money, and his crude humor and blunt language often clash with Dr. Shirley's refined, reserved demeanor. The racial prejudice Tony holds is apparent, as he is unaware of the depth of the challenges Shirley faces. In the early scenes, Tony's ignorance of black culture and his blunt, often offensive remarks serve as a source of tension between the two men. Tony is particularly uncomfortable with the idea of Shirley being isolated from the rest of the world because of his race, but he lacks the vocabulary or understanding to express empathy. Instead, his approach to the situation is based on a surface-level, simplistic view of race, often dismissing Shirley's struggles as exaggerated or unnecessary. On the other hand, Dr. Shirley views Tony with disdain at first, perceiving him as unrefined, uneducated, and culturally unsophisticated. His initial lack of respect for Tony's working-class background is palpable, as he sees little in common with a man who has lived a life of privilege based on his skin color. Shirley's initial reaction to Tony is not only one of distaste but also of suspicion, as he wonders whether Tony can genuinely understand the complexities of the issues he faces as an African-American man in a segregated society. However, as the film progresses, the two men begin to learn from each other and break down the barriers that initially separate them. Their evolving friendship is both subtle and profound, Throughout the journey, the two men find common ground in unexpected ways, discovering shared interests and mutual respect. While Tony begins to learn about the emotional and psychological toll that racism takes on Dr. Shirley, Shirley begins to appreciate the humanity in Tony that he initially dismissed. Their conversations, which were initially awkward and uncomfortable, gradually become moments of genuine connection. One of the most powerful aspects of Green Book is its ability to portray complex, nuanced themes of race and identity while still maintaining a sense of hope and optimism. The film never shies away from the harsh realities of racism, particularly in the context of the 1960s South. Through the experiences of Dr. Shirley and Tony, the film exposes the deeply ingrained social prejudices that were prevalent at the time. However, it also underscores the possibility of change and growth through human connection. The narrative is not merely about exposing injustice, but about showing how individuals can evolve and change their views through genuine relationships. Another important theme in Green Book is the idea of personal transformation. Both Tony and Dr. Shirley undergo significant changes over the course of the film, shaped by their interactions with each other and the challenges they face together. Tony, for example, learns to question his own biases and prejudices as he witnesses the indignities and injustices that Dr. Shirley faces. He becomes increasingly protective of Shirley, standing up for him when he is denied service at restaurants or subjected to racial slurs. Tony's willingness to confront his own biases and change his behavior is one of the most inspiring aspects of the film. Similarly, Dr. Shirley undergoes his own transformation. Initially, he is distant and reserved, but over time, he begins to open up to Tony, and by extension, to the audience. He reveals his vulnerability, his fears, and the loneliness that he has often had to endure as a black man in a white-dominated world. Through his relationship with Tony, Dr. Shirley learns to let go of his emotional reserve and embrace the possibility of genuine human connection. By the end of the film, the bond between Tony and Dr. Shirley is no longer defined by their differences, but by their shared experiences and mutual respect. Their journey together, both literal and metaphorical, represents the possibility of overcoming division and finding common ground. Green Book offers a powerful reminder that personal transformation and social change are not only possible, but can be catalyzed by the human connections that bring us together. In summary, Green Book is a film that explores the complexities of race, friendship, and personal growth in an era defined by segregation and inequality. Through the journey of its two central characters, Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley, the film highlights the power of empathy, understanding, and shared humanity. The film's exploration of social issues is not heavy-handed or preachy, but instead is grounded in the authentic, evolving relationship between its two protagonists. The film is a celebration of the human spirit, illustrating how genuine connections can break down the walls of prejudice and build bridges of understanding. As Green Book continues its exploration of race, identity, and transformation, the second section delves deeper into the cultural clashes and initial misunderstandings that define the relationship between Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley. In this part of the film, Tony begins his role as the driver for Dr. Shirley, and their dynamic is filled with tension, awkwardness, and subtle prejudice. From their very first interactions, it becomes clear that the two men are worlds apart, not just in terms of race, but also in class, education, and worldview. Why? These differences lay the groundwork for the emotional evolution that both characters undergo over the course of their journey. The first major hurdle Tony faces is his own ignorance about the world that Dr. Shirley inhabits. Tony, a tough, blue-collar Italian-American man, sees the job as a simple means to an end. He views the entire endeavor through the lens of his own limited perspective. Raised in a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx, Tony has little exposure to the world of African-American culture, especially the upper echelons of black society represented by Dr. Shirley. Shirley is not the type of African-American man Tony is used to interacting with. He is cultured, intellectual, and highly educated, attributes that are foreign to Tony, who comes from a background where emotional expression and intellectual engagement are not encouraged. For Tony, the concept of Dr. Shirley being a professional musician, living in a luxurious New York apartment and earning high fees for his performances, is both admirable and confounding. He doesn't understand why Dr. Shirley doesn't behave in the same way as other successful black people he may have encountered. Tony's initial treatment of Dr. Shirley reflects the mindset of someone who views him through a lens of stereotype and superficial judgment. In the first few scenes, Tony makes clumsy and inappropriate remarks about Shirley's lifestyle and tastes, revealing his lack of understanding of the pianist's personal experiences as a black man in America. Tony is shocked to learn that Shirley insists on traveling with his own food, since he cannot dine at the same restaurants as white patrons due to segregation laws, and that he refuses to stay at accommodations that discriminate against black people. This insistence on maintaining personal dignity and autonomy is alien to Tony, whose world is governed by a more simplistic, straightforward approach to life. Despite his initial discomfort, Tony eventually begins to understand the reality of Dr. Shirley's life on the road. The film doesn't shy away from showcasing the daily indignities and frustrations that Shirley faces as a black man in the Jim Crow South. He is repeatedly confronted with racist slurs, unfair treatment, and exclusion from the same spaces that white people are allowed to occupy. For example, in one scene, Dr. Shirley is denied service at a restaurant where Tony was hoping to stop for a meal, a clear demonstration of the pervasive racial segregation of the time. He, in his role as Shirley's protector, finds himself increasingly disturbed by these experiences, and he begins to question his own complacency in the face of racism. The film uses these moments to highlight Tony's gradual realization that the life Dr. Shirley leads, despite his success, has been shaped by a lifetime of enduring prejudice and exclusion. Tony starts to see Shirley as more than just a rich, well-dressed man who is different from him. He begins to understand the emotional and psychological toll that racism takes on Shirley, and this realization marks the beginning of Tony's internal shift. Tony's sense of right and wrong begins to evolve as he watches Shirley navigate the cruel realities of segregation. He begins to question his own biases and his assumptions about black people. Dr. Shirley's response to Tony's limited understanding is one of frustration and resignation. He often challenges Tony's narrow view of the world, using sarcasm and wit to underline his intelligence and education. However, while Shirley's interactions with Tony are occasionally sharp, they also reveal his own internal battles. He has spent much of his life trying to shield himself from the oppressive racism around him by cultivating an air of emotional distance and sophistication. His defense mechanism is to remain aloof, to stay above the fray of the world that constantly reminds him of his race. In this sense, Dr. Shirley is also a deeply lonely man, as he has intentionally distanced himself from both the black community, who view him as an elite out of touch with their struggles, and the white community, who see him as a black man, regardless of his accomplishments. Throughout this period of the journey, Tony and Shirley's relationship is one of polite but strained interaction. Tony, who has little understanding of the sacrifices that Shirley has made in his life to succeed, cannot fully comprehend the pain Shirley hides behind his composed exterior. Dr. Shirley's quiet dignity and subtle frustration with the world are on full display as the two men endure multiple encounters with the systemic racism that pervades their environment. There is a particular moment when Dr. Shirley, while sitting in the back seat of the car, opens up just a little about the pain he feels in being rejected by both black and white communities. He confesses that he is constantly asked, "Why don't you just act like a black man?" The comment reveals how exhausting it is to live as a person who doesn't quite fit into any one category. Tony, though still not fully grasping the weight of Shirley's experience, begins to get a glimpse of the quiet suffering that Dr. Shirley has to endure on a daily basis. Tony, who initially thought of the job as merely a means of earning money, begins to feel protective of Dr. Shirley. There are moments when Tony steps in to defend Shirley, even when it's uncomfortable for him. This marks a subtle but significant shift in Tony's character, as he moves from being a passive observer of racial injustice to an active participant in combating it. His willingness to challenge the oppressive systems around them, even when it means putting himself in uncomfortable situations, signifies his growth. For example, Tony's confrontation with a hotel manager, who refuses to let Dr. Shirley stay at the establishment due to its racially exclusive policies, is an important turning point for both characters. Tony's decision to stand up to the manager, despite the potential consequences, demonstrates how far he has come in terms of his own evolution. Through these interactions, the film lays the groundwork for a slow and steady transformation in both Tony and Dr. Shirley. While their differences are still apparent, there is an emerging respect between the two men that will become central to the film's progression. Tony's growth as a human being, particularly in his newfound awareness of the struggles Dr. Shirley faces, underscores the central message of Green Book. That true change happens when individuals are willing to listen, learn, and break through their biases. This section of the film serves as a foundation for the deepening of their relationship, setting the stage for the more profound changes that both men will experience as they continue on their journey together. As Green Book continues to explore the evolving relationship between Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley, Section 3 marks a critical turning point in their dynamic. The film's narrative shifts from initial tension and awkwardness to a more nuanced understanding and growing respect between the two men. In this section, we see them confronted with some of the most blatant forms of racism they will encounter during their road trip through the Deep South, which forces both characters to confront their own biases, fears, and assumptions. The challenges they face together deepen their bond and push them toward significant personal transformation. At the heart of this section is the difficult realization that despite their differing worldviews, Tony and Dr. Shirley must rely on each other in a society that is openly hostile to them. They both understand that their survival and success on the road depend not only on their individual strengths, but also on their ability to compromise and work together. For Tony, this means learning how to navigate the complexities of Dr. Shirley's world, understanding how Shirley's life as a highly educated black musician places him at odds with his own more straightforward, working-class existence. For Dr. Shirley, it means learning to trust Tony in a way he hasn't trusted anyone in a long time. In this section, the film takes a deep dive into the pervasive and institutionalized racism that both characters face, albeit in very different ways. As they travel through towns in the South, it becomes clear that Dr. Shirley, due to his wealth and education, is not immune to the racial discrimination that runs rampant during the Jim Crow era. His experience is one of constant exclusion, humiliation, and erasure. As a black man with high social status, Dr. Shirley exists in a liminal space between two worlds, too refined and intellectual for many black people to identify with, but simultaneously too black for many white people to accept him as an equal. This creates an emotional isolation that the audience begins to feel acutely. Dr. Shirley's discomfort in navigating predominantly white spaces speaks volumes about the subtle but pervasive racial codes of the time, which enforced not just legal segregation, but also cultural and psychological barriers. Tony, meanwhile, is a man of the streets, comfortable in the rough-and-tumble world of Bronx bars and Italian-American communities. He is not accustomed to the high society that Dr. Shirley inhabits, and he is equally uncomfortable in the racially tense environments of the South. However, what Tony does understand is the code of loyalty and the protective instinct that runs deep in him. He sees himself as a protector of his family, his friends, and now, strangely enough, of Dr. Shirley. This section of the movie shows how Tony's sense of loyalty to Dr. Shirley begins to manifest itself in increasingly profound ways. When they are confronted with blatant racism, such as being refused service at a restaurant, Tony does not hesitate to defend his boss, even when it costs him. This moment is particularly powerful because it signals a shift in Tony's understanding of right and wrong. For a man who has spent much of his life avoiding direct confrontation with racial issues, standing up for Dr. Shirley becomes an act of personal growth, one that requires him to step outside his comfort zone. One of the most significant moments in this section occurs when Tony finds himself forced to confront his own prejudices. Early in the trip, Tony makes several racially insensitive comments about Dr. Shirley's lifestyle, including expressing surprise that Shirley enjoys classical music and high culture. These comments reflect Tony's initial ignorance about Shirley's world, and the false assumptions he harbors about African Americans, particularly those who are wealthy and educated. As the story unfolds, Tony becomes more aware of the complexities of Shirley's life, and this awareness begins to affect his own views. The most pivotal moment in this process occurs when Tony witnesses Dr. Shirley's emotional breakdown. Shirley, who has always maintained a stoic, composed exterior, finally cracks under the pressure of constant rejection, exclusion, and humiliation. This raw moment exposes the vulnerability that Dr. Shirley has spent his life hiding. Tony, who has never had to grapple with the emotional and psychological toll of racism, begins to understand just how deeply hurtful these experiences are. The transformation that Tony undergoes in this section is not only intellectual, but also emotional. As he begins to see Dr. Shirley as more than just a wealthy musician, Tony starts to empathize with the pain and loneliness that Shirley has endured. He understands that Shirley's pride and self-respect are not signs of arrogance or superiority, but are instead a defense mechanism, a way for Shirley to protect himself from the world's prejudice. This moment of empathy is one of the most powerful turning points in the film because it represents the beginning of the dismantling of Tony's own prejudices. At the same time, this section also underscores the ways in which Dr. Shirley's personal growth is equally important. Throughout the journey, Shirley's complex emotional landscape is gradually revealed. His decision to hire Tony as his driver in the first place was a gamble. Shirley, who has spent much of his life trying to rise above the limitations of race, initially viewed Tony as little more than a driver, someone who could perform a simple task, not someone who would come to understand him on a deeper level. However, as the journey continues, Dr. Shirley begins to recognize that Tony, despite his rough edges and limited education, is a man of integrity and loyalty. Shirley's decision to allow Tony to stand up for him, to defend him against racial discrimination, marks a profound shift in their relationship. It shows that Dr. Shirley is learning to trust Tony, not just as an employee but as a fellow human being. In this section, the emotional growth of both men becomes the beating heart of the film. Their journey is no longer just a road trip to a series of concerts. It has become an exploration of who they are as people and what they can learn from each other. The film's narrative is propelled forward by their evolving relationship, which moves beyond the surface-level differences of race, class, and background. Instead, the focus shifts to the deeper, more universal aspects of human connection, loyalty, empathy, and shared humanity. The growing bond between Tony and Dr. Shirley is symbolized by their increasingly personal conversations. As the two men share stories from their lives, they begin to see each other not as representatives of their races or social classes, but as complex individuals with dreams, fears, and desires. These conversations are not only pivotal for their characters, but also for the film's overarching message about the power of human connection. The film suggests that while racism may seek to divide people based on the color of their skin, the shared experiences of life, the pain, the joy, the hardships, and the triumphs, are what ultimately bring people together. By the end of this section, both Tony and Dr. Shirley have made significant progress in their personal journeys. Tony has evolved from a man who saw the world through a narrow, racialized lens, to someone who is beginning to understand the human cost of prejudice. Dr. Shirley, on the other hand, has learned to trust Tony and to allow himself to be vulnerable, something he had previously avoided. The film leaves us with a sense of hope, showing that even in the face of systemic racism, individuals have the power to break through barriers and form meaningful connections. As Tony and Dr. Shirley continue their journey together, the potential for true transformation, both individually and as a society, becomes increasingly clear. As Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley continue their journey through the American South in Green Book, Section 4 delves deeper into the evolving relationship between the two men. What was once a purely transactional and professional relationship is beginning to shift, with Tony showing signs of personal growth and Dr. Shirley demonstrating more trust in his unlikely companion. The pair's road trip becomes not only a literal journey through some of the country's most racially charged territories, but also a metaphorical journey into empathy, friendship, and shared humanity. The setting of this section is critical as it explores how the culture of the Deep South shapes their interactions with people, testing their resolve and forcing them to face harsh truths. Dr. Shirley, despite his wealth and refined education, is constantly reminded of his race, which brings him face to face with the stark realities of racial prejudice. Tony, who was raised in an Italian-American enclave in the Bronx and has lived much of his life blind to the struggles of African Americans, begins to understand that Dr. Shirley's experience as a black man in the South is a constant challenge, not just for his physical safety, but also for his dignity and emotional well-being. One of the most compelling aspects of this section is the way Green Book carefully contrasts the different ways in which Dr. Shirley and Tony experience and respond to racism. Dr. Shirley's education and class status do little to shield him from the dehumanizing behavior of white people in the South. As a successful concert pianist, he might have expected to be treated with respect. However, he quickly discovers that his musical talents are not enough to elevate his status beyond the racial prejudice of the time. He is still just a black man in the eyes of many white people, and this becomes evident through incidents of discrimination in hotels, restaurants, and other establishments they visit. For example, in one particularly painful scene, Dr. Shirley is denied service at a restaurant due to the color of his skin. He is expected to dine in the kitchen, not in the main dining area where white customers are served. This moment is significant not only because of the blatant racism Shirley faces, but because of the way Tony reacts. At first, Tony is shocked by the treatment but is unsure of how to respond. He is not accustomed to seeing people like Dr. Shirley being treated in this way and does not know how to navigate the situation. However, as the film progresses, Tony begins to understand the depth of what Shirley experiences. He starts to recognize that his own privilege, his status as a white working-class man, has shielded him from the harsh realities that Shirley faces daily. In contrast, Tony's own experience with racism is more subtle and often rooted in his working-class Italian background. He is not part of the elite social circles of the South, and as such, he faces his own brand of discrimination, albeit not as overt as the hostility Shirley encounters. The tension between the two men's experiences of discrimination becomes an important dynamic in this section, as they both come to terms with the limitations of their worldviews. Tony's initial discomfort and occasional racial prejudice are in stark contrast to Dr. Shirley's constant vigilance and awareness of his race. However, as they continue their journey, they start to find common ground in their shared experiences of being outsiders in a society that demands conformity. Another key moment in this section is when Tony steps in to protect Dr. Shirley. After being mistreated and humiliated in a restaurant, Tony, whose loyalty to Shirley has been growing, decides to take action. He stands up for Dr. Shirley in a direct and physical way, confronting the restaurant staff and demanding that they treat his boss with respect. This is a turning point for Tony's character, as he begins to recognize that his role in the relationship is not simply as a driver or assistant, but as someone who can actively defend Dr. Shirley's dignity. Tony's transformation is gradual but profound, as he learns that standing up against racism is not just about individual encounters, but about a broader commitment to justice and respect for others. This section also highlights the emotional toll that the constant rejection and mistreatment take on Dr. Shirley. Despite his outward composure, Shirley is deeply affected by the repeated slights and indignities he faces, even when they are seemingly minor. For someone like Shirley, who has spent years cultivating a refined sense of self, and who prides himself on his artistry and intellect, these constant reminders of his race can feel like a personal assault. The psychological burden of living in a society that constantly diminishes him is palpable. This is made clear when Shirley opens up to Tony about the pain he feels from being constantly excluded, not just from white society but from his own community as well. Shirley feels torn between his love for his own people and the feeling that they don't fully accept him because of his success and his more sophisticated lifestyle. Dr. Shirley's vulnerability in this moment is important, as it allows Tony to see him not just as a figure of refinement and intellect, but as a person with feelings, fears, and insecurities. The connection between the two men deepens as they share a moment of emotional honesty. Tony's ability to listen and empathize with Shirley's pain shows how far he has come in understanding that their differences are not as important as their shared humanity. One of the more poignant moments in this section is the growing bond between Tony and Shirley during the long stretches of their road trip. During their time on the road, the two men are forced into close quarters, and their conversations become more personal. Tony learns about Shirley's difficult childhood and the sacrifices he made to pursue his passion for music. Shirley, in turn, learns about Tony's family life, his wife and his children, and the weight of his responsibilities as a provider. These moments of vulnerability allow the two men to see each other more clearly, as not just a rich black man and a working-class white man, but as individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams. As the section progresses, Tony's initial ignorance begins to give way to a deeper understanding of the ways in which racism permeates every aspect of life for Dr. Shirley. He begins to understand that Shirley's suffering is not just about the overt acts of discrimination, but about the ongoing psychological toll of being treated as less than human on a daily basis. This realization marks a critical turning point for Tony, who starts to question his own beliefs and attitudes toward race. By the end of this section, the relationship between Tony and Dr. Shirley is transformed. What began as a professional arrangement has blossomed into a meaningful, if unlikely, friendship. While the two men still have a long way to go in understanding each other's worlds, the bond they share is undeniable. Tony's loyalty to Shirley has become a cornerstone of their relationship, while Shirley's willingness to open up and trust Tony marks a significant shift in his own emotional journey. In this section, Green Book demonstrates that while the journey toward empathy and understanding can be long and difficult, it is ultimately the key to breaking down the barriers that divide us. Through their shared experiences, Tony and Dr. Shirley begin to transcend the divisions of race, class, and background, finding common ground in their shared humanity. In Green Book, Section 5 marks a pivotal moment in the relationship between Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley. It's a section that truly showcases the profound transformation both characters experience, both in terms of their understanding of the world around them and in their growing friendship. By this point, Tony has evolved from being a simple, somewhat prejudiced man to someone who is capable of seeing beyond surface-level stereotypes and understanding the deep-rooted, often painful, realities of racism and social inequality. Meanwhile, Dr. Shirley, who had initially kept Tony at arm's length, begins to open up and trust him in a way that he hasn't with anyone else in his life. The dynamic between the two men continues to shift, and both begin to challenge each other's assumptions about the world and themselves. This section begins with the duo's arrival at a particularly intense leg of their journey. As they venture deeper into the southern United States, the landscape becomes even more hostile and racially segregated. This is particularly important because it's in this section that the two men face an open and unmistakable instance of violence. As Tony and Dr. Shirley arrive at a segregated town, the tension between them and the locals escalates to a point where they are attacked by a group of white men. The situation becomes physically threatening, with Dr. Shirley being openly mocked and ridiculed, while Tony attempts to defuse the situation, demonstrating just how much his role as protector of Shirley has evolved. The incident serves as a brutal reminder of the pervasiveness of racism in the American South during the 1960s. What makes this moment so striking is the way the two men respond differently to the situation. Dr. Shirley, though clearly upset and disturbed by the treatment, chooses to remain calm and dignified, masking his vulnerability beneath a veneer of control. In contrast, Tony reacts with raw emotion, his instinct being to protect Shirley at all costs. This is not just a physical altercation, but a battle of ideologies. Dr. Shirley's restraint and Tony's protective fury expose the stark contrast between their lives and perspectives. After the confrontation, the two men retreat to their car. It is here that Tony's frustration and anger start to spill out. He can't understand why Dr. Shirley doesn't seem to want to fight back or defend himself. To Tony, it feels like Shirley is allowing people to disrespect him without retaliation. This frustration marks a turning point in Tony's understanding of Shirley. He finally begins to see the complex emotional cost of Dr. Shirley's constant navigation of a world that is hostile to him, and he starts to grasp the emotional restraint Shirley must employ in order to protect his career, his dignity, and his safety. In this scene, the filmmakers juxtapose Tony's more visceral response with Shirley's controlled demeanor, which beautifully contrasts their two very different but equally valid ways of handling racism. As the story progresses, the two characters are forced into close quarters again, with both men opening up to each other in ways that reflect their growing respect and empathy. Dr. Shirley reveals more of his backstory, his personal struggles, and the sacrifices he has made throughout his life. These personal revelations serve to deepen the audience's understanding of why Shirley is the way he is. He shares with Tony his feeling of alienation, not just from white society but from his own community. Shirley's success as an accomplished musician has distanced him from the black community, many of whom view him as too proper or too refined. This sense of isolation is compounded by the fact that Shirley is forced to constantly conceal his true identity in public spaces, whether it's by pretending to be someone he's not, or by suppressing his emotions for fear of putting himself in danger. Tony listens attentively, offering insights from his own life that reflect the similar emotional burdens they both carry. He opens up about his own family, his wife, children, and the complex dynamics within his Italian-American neighborhood. Tony begins to see for the first time how his own struggles and frustrations are mirrored in Dr. Shirley's life. The two men connect on a human level, finding common ground in their shared feelings of loneliness and yearning for a place where they can truly be themselves. This section also highlights the growth of Tony's character as he comes to realize the impact that race has on every aspect of Dr. Shirley's life. While Tony initially assumed that Dr. Shirley's success and education would shield him from the difficulties of being black in America, he slowly learns that no amount of status or wealth can protect Shirley from the dehumanizing effects of racism. This realization shakes Tony to his core, causing him to confront his own biases and assumptions about the world. Tony begins to question his former beliefs about race and social class, recognizing that his experiences, despite the struggles he faces as a working-class man, do not compare to the daily discrimination and humiliation that Dr. Shirley endures. As Tony grows more attuned to the realities of race and class, he takes active steps to protect Dr. Shirley. This section shows him becoming more proactive in defending Shirley from racist encounters, whether it's by stepping in when Shirley is treated unfairly in a public setting or by confronting individuals who exhibit overt racism. One of the most poignant moments in this section is when Tony goes out of his way to find a proper place for Dr. Shirley to eat and sleep, locations that are not segregated and that respect Shirley's dignity as a human being. The emotional growth of Tony is laid bare here, as he begins to understand that his role as Shirley's driver is not just a job, but a meaningful opportunity to make a difference in someone else's life. He realizes that by standing up for Shirley, he is not just helping him. He is challenging the unjust system that perpetuates racism and inequality. For Dr. Shirley, this section represents a turning point in his own emotional journey. As he begins to open up to Tony, he slowly comes to trust him, recognizing that Tony's actions are motivated by genuine care and empathy. Though their relationship started with tension and mutual skepticism, the two men now understand that they share a deep connection that transcends race and class. Shirley is no longer the aloof, stoic figure who viewed Tony as a mere driver. He now sees him as a friend, someone who, despite his flaws, is capable of kindness and loyalty. This section in Green Book encapsulates the central theme of the film, that human connection, empathy, and understanding can transcend societal boundaries. Through their road trip, both Tony and Dr. Shirley are forced to confront their differences and learn from each other. Tony learns the painful realities of racism, while Dr. Shirley begins to see the possibility of acceptance in places and people he never expected to find it. The strength of their relationship continues to grow, and with each passing moment, they push each other toward a better understanding of what it means to be human in a deeply divided world. By the end of this section, the film has set the stage for a deeper emotional exploration of the bond between Tony and Dr. Shirley. They may still have differences in their experiences and perspectives, but they now share a mutual respect that is hard-earned and profoundly transformative. Green Book masterfully portrays how the power of friendship can break down the barriers that divide us, and in doing so, it offers a hopeful message about the possibility of change and reconciliation, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. In Green Book, Section 6 continues to build on the evolving relationship between Tony Lip and Dr. Don Shirley as their road trip reaches more complex and difficult moments. By this stage in the film, they are far from the surface-level interactions they initially had when they first met. The journey they are on is not just a physical one, but an emotional and intellectual voyage that will change both of their lives in profound ways. This section, like the rest of the film, masterfully conveys how these two men, who come from very different worlds, are forced into a shared experience that challenges their assumptions, exposes their biases, and eventually leads to deep mutual respect. In this particular section, the emotional stakes rise considerably as Tony and Dr. Shirley encounter a series of setbacks and moments of personal vulnerability. These instances force the two men to face uncomfortable truths about themselves, their pasts, and the deep-rooted societal inequalities they must navigate. One of the key themes explored here is the impact of racism and classism, and how these forces create obstacles that go beyond just individual prejudice. This section is pivotal in showing how Tony and Dr. Shirley learn to connect with each other not only through empathy, but also through a shared understanding of the emotional costs of their respective social positions. As the two men journey through the racially segregated South, they encounter increasingly difficult and dangerous situations. These encounters often underscore the brutal realities of life for Dr. Shirley, who, despite his incredible talent and accomplishments, is constantly subjected to the cruelty of systemic racism. Dr. Shirley, being a black man of immense status and intelligence, is often seen as an outsider both within the black community and in white spaces. His struggles are not just about being a black man. They are about being a man who must navigate a world that doesn't fully accept him, even though his achievements suggest that he should be embraced. One of the significant moments in this section comes when Tony and Dr. Shirley arrive at a hotel that is racially segregated. Dr. Shirley, despite being the famous pianist he is told he cannot stay there. This scene is a stark reminder of the pervasive racism that continues to infect the fabric of American society, even in a time when the civil rights movement is starting to make significant strides. The deep-seated racial prejudices are so entrenched that even in the face of Dr. Shirley's evident success, he is still treated as inferior. This experience serves as an important turning point for both men. Tony, who initially struggled to understand Dr. Shirley's experiences of racism, is confronted with the cold, unforgiving reality of just how cruel and ingrained discrimination can be. Tony's reaction to this injustice is one of deep frustration. Up until this point, he has been protective of Dr. Shirley in his own way, but this is the first time he truly witnesses the extent of the emotional toll that racism takes on his companion. Tony's protective instincts kick in, but they are overshadowed by his frustration and anger at seeing someone he respects being mistreated so blatantly. This scene is pivotal because it forces Tony to confront his own biases and assumptions about race, as well as his belief in the idea of earning respect through hard work or success. For Tony, Dr. Shirley's experience of racism shatters the notion that success and talent are enough to overcome social barriers. Tony begins to grasp that racism is not about individual merit, but about a deep-seated system that seeks to dehumanize entire groups of people. For Dr. Shirley, the incident is equally difficult. His ability to remain composed in such a degrading situation speaks to the emotional fortitude he has built over the years as a result of constantly being pushed to the margins of society. However, beneath the exterior of calmness lies a profound sense of isolation and sadness. Dr. Shirley's social status as an accomplished artist has not protected him from the effects of racism. In fact, it has only made him more painfully aware of the chasm between his identity and the expectations placed upon him. The emotional toll of constantly hiding his true self, of never fully fitting in anywhere, is a burden that Dr. Shirley carries quietly, but powerfully. What makes this section so important is the subtle shift that occurs in their relationship. Tony, who initially believed he was the protector and the one who understood how to navigate the harsh realities of life, begins to see the world through Dr. Shirley's eyes. This moment of realization is crucial in their bond. Tony now understands that Dr. Shirley's calmness and stoicism are not signs of weakness but survival mechanisms developed over years of being marginalized. It's a humbling moment for Tony, who is now beginning to comprehend the depths of the emotional and psychological toll that racism has taken on Dr. Shirley. The two men continue their journey, and their conversations become more frequent and deeper. It is through these dialogues that both characters begin to peel back the layers of their respective identities. For Tony, these conversations serve as an opportunity to learn more about Dr. Shirley's personal history and the complex emotions that come with living in a racially divided world. Dr. Shirley, on the other hand, starts to see Tony not just as a working-class Italian-American, but as someone who is capable of growth and change. One of the most profound exchanges in this section occurs when Dr. Shirley shares more about his childhood and his complex relationship with his family. He speaks of his upbringing in a predominantly white community and the cultural tensions that shaped his identity. Dr. Shirley's words reveal the deep loneliness he has felt throughout his life, a loneliness not just caused by his race but also by his intellectual and emotional differences from those around him. This candid conversation opens Tony's eyes to the fact that Dr. Shirley's struggles are not only about race but also about belonging, about finding a space where he can truly feel accepted as his authentic self. As their relationship develops, Tony, who once viewed Dr. Shirley as an enigmatic and difficult figure, begins to understand the emotional complexity of his companion. The bond that forms between the two men in this section is not just about shared experiences, but also about mutual understanding. Tony starts to realize that his role as Dr. Shirley's driver is not just a means to an end, but an opportunity to stand alongside someone who, despite his wealth and status, faces hardships that Tony could never fully comprehend. The scenes in this section mark a shift in their dynamic, from one of a transactional nature to one of genuine camaraderie and friendship. Despite the obstacles they face in this part of the film, there is a sense of hope that emerges from the growing understanding between Tony and Dr. Shirley. The hard lessons learned through their shared experiences of racial tension and societal exclusion bring them closer, making them realize that, at the core, their struggles are not as different as they once seemed. This connection they share is not just about their individual battles with prejudice, but about the humanity that unites them, transcending race, class, and circumstance. It is this moment of mutual recognition that becomes the heart of Green Book and sets the stage for the deep bond that will develop between Tony and Dr. Shirley as the journey progresses. In conclusion, Section 6 of Green Book serves as a critical turning point in the film, where both characters experience significant emotional growth. Through their interactions, they begin to understand not only the complexity of racism, but also the importance of empathy, compassion, and the shared human experience. The adversity they face together sets the stage for the powerful friendship that will ultimately define the rest of the story, leaving both men changed in profound ways. In Section 7 of Green Book, the journey continues as Tony and Dr. Shirley face new challenges, deepening their bond as they navigate not only the physical journey across the American South, but also the emotional terrain that brings them closer together. This section serves as an essential turning point where the tensions in their relationship begin to dissolve, revealing a profound understanding between two men who, despite their vastly different backgrounds, are forced to confront their own biases, assumptions, and vulnerabilities. At this stage in their road trip, Tony and Dr. Shirley have already been through moments of conflict and discomfort. But this section provides the opportunity for their relationship to mature. The bond they formed over the course of the journey becomes increasingly evident as they begin to share personal stories and more candid, vulnerable moments. While they continue to confront the harsh realities of racial segregation, they are also beginning to find ways to understand and accept one another's differences. A key moment in this section involves a significant encounter with a hotel manager that forces Tony and Dr. Shirley to confront the ugliness of segregation in a personal and unsettling way. Despite Dr. Shirley's success and fame as a pianist, he is once again denied basic human dignity and respect because of the color of his skin. This scene becomes a pivotal moment in the film, underscoring the painful contradictions of the time period. How societal structures, deeply entrenched in racism, continue to deny black individuals their humanity, no matter their accomplishments or status. The tension in this scene is palpable. Tony, who had previously been uncomfortable with the idea of standing up to racism, now finds himself in a position where his loyalty to Dr. Shirley is tested. Tony's natural inclination to protect and defend begins to surface in a way that he had not experienced before. He is infuriated by the injustice that Dr. Shirley faces, and this marks a profound change in Tony's character. For the first time, Tony becomes acutely aware of how deep the wound of racism runs, not only in the lives of black people, but in his own understanding of the world. However, Tony's sense of justice is not enough to change the course of events. The systemic structures of racism remain immovable, and once again, Dr. Shirley is left to face the harsh realities of segregation. The contrast between Tony's anger and Dr. Shirley's quiet resilience speaks volumes. Dr. Shirley, who has endured years of similar injustices, remains composed, though it is clear that the emotional toll of constant discrimination is taking its toll on him. It is in these moments that the audience truly understands the depth of Dr. Shirley's burden, the psychological and emotional weight that comes with navigating a world that is fundamentally hostile to him simply because of his skin color. This dynamic also brings to the forefront a deep emotional divide that exists between the two men. For Tony, this is a moment of awakening, as he begins to understand that the struggles Dr. Shirley faces are not just a matter of personal character or choice. The constraints placed on Dr. Shirley's life are a product of a racist society that devalues his existence, no matter how talented or accomplished he may be. In this way, Tony begins to shed his previous notions of what it means to be a good man in the context of social inequality. The emotional breakthrough for Tony does not come easily. His reactions are raw and visceral, a stark contrast to the calm exterior that Dr. Shirley has adopted over the years. Tony is learning that there are battles beyond the physical ones, that the emotional and psychological scars left by racism run deep. In his past, Tony had fought his own battles, those of poverty, family struggles, and the roughness of his neighborhood. Yet he realizes that Dr. Shirley's struggles are not as easily understood. This realization forces Tony to take a hard look at his own worldview and begin to grapple with the ways in which he has benefited from the system that oppresses Dr. Shirley and others like him. Dr. Shirley's response to Tony's newfound empathy is complex. He appreciates Tony's loyalty, but he also remains cautious. For Dr. Shirley, the journey is not only about teaching Tony about racism, but also about learning to trust someone who comes from a vastly different background. Throughout the film, Dr. Shirley is shown to be a man of intellect, but his intellect also distances him from the world around him. He is aware that his accomplishments have not granted him true acceptance in the white spaces he occupies. And yet, he is also acutely aware of the cultural rift that separates him from the black community, who see him as too elite or other. This emotional complexity is reflected in the conversations they have as the trip progresses. The quiet moments they share become more intimate and more honest, revealing layers of vulnerability and humanity that had previously been masked. One such conversation occurs when Dr. Shirley speaks candidly about his past, including his upbringing in a segregated society, and the sacrifices his family made in order for him to pursue his dreams. Through these conversations, Tony comes to understand that Dr. Shirley's intellect and composure are not just personality traits, they are survival mechanisms developed over years of navigating a world that has been unwilling to accept him. This growing understanding between Tony and Dr. Shirley is not just about race. It is also about class, identity, and the emotional toll of striving for something greater than what society tells you you deserve. Dr. Shirley's alienation from both the black and white communities points to a deep social divide that neither man can easily navigate. Tony, who comes from a working-class Italian-American background, is not immune to the pressures of his own social status, but he begins to recognize the stark differences in the way he and Dr. Shirley are treated based solely on race. The deepening bond between Tony and Dr. Shirley culminates in a powerful moment of connection where they share more than just words. They share experiences. Tony, who had once struggled to see beyond his own biases, is now fully immersed in the experience of seeing the world through Dr. Shirley's eyes. This connection is emotional, intellectual, and ultimately transformative. It's a reflection of the way their relationship has evolved from one of obligation and convenience to one of genuine friendship and mutual respect. However, this section is not without its moments of tension. The journey is long, and the road to understanding is still fraught with missteps and moments of discomfort. Tony's progress is not linear. His struggle to reconcile his personal beliefs with the experiences Dr. Shirley faces continues. Yet, it is in these messy, imperfect moments that the strength of their friendship becomes clear. They are both learning, growing, and changing, and they are doing it together. As they continue their journey, the personal transformation of both characters becomes central to the emotional arc of the film. For Tony, the change is more visible. He becomes more introspective, more aware of his own prejudices, and more determined to stand by Dr. Shirley in the face of overwhelming social injustice. For Dr. Shirley, the transformation is more subtle, but no less important. Through Tony's loyalty, Dr. Shirley begins to reclaim some sense of agency in a world that has tried to strip him of his dignity. Their bond becomes a powerful reminder of the humanity that transcends the superficial divisions of race, class, and social standing. Green Book thus marks a significant turning point in the story. It's a section where Tony and Dr. Shirley begin to navigate the deeper emotional complexities of their relationship, as well as the painful realities of the world around them. It's a testament to the power of empathy and to the potential for change and growth when two people are willing to see the world through each other's eyes. The struggles they face together not only bring them closer but also reinforce the idea that, at the end of the day, the human connection is the most powerful tool in overcoming adversity. Green Book, the journey reaches a new emotional and physical climax. The relationship between Tony and Dr. Shirley undergoes significant shifts as they confront some of the most difficult aspects of their respective worlds. It's a section that underscores the film's central themes of friendship, understanding, and the need to break down the societal structures that divide people. In this part of the story, their trip through the segregated American South brings them face to face with some of the ugliest manifestations of racism. However, it also brings an opportunity for them to reevaluate their assumptions, not just about race, but also about themselves and each other. The bond between them, once founded on mere necessity, begins to evolve into something more profound as they both start to shed their preconceived notions. The section begins with an intense situation that showcases the harsh realities of segregation. As they travel through a particularly hostile town, they encounter an establishment where Dr. Shirley, despite his fame as a pianist, is not allowed to stay because of his race. This blatant act of racism forces both men to confront the emotional toll that such discrimination has on them, though in very different ways. Dr. Shirley, who has long been forced to live in a world where his black identity is continually minimized, is resigned to the reality of it. He's learned to cope with rejection, humiliation, and degradation. His composure is that of a man who has had to endure these indignities for most of his life, and yet his quiet strength reveals the weight of this burden. Tony, however, is incensed. For the first time, he truly understands just how deeply the system of segregation affects not just the lives of people like Dr. Shirley, but their very sense of self. Tony's loyalty to Dr. Shirley has grown significantly by this point, and seeing his friend treated in such an unjust and demeaning way causes him to question the world he thought he understood. For someone like Tony, who is used to fighting for his own survival in a harsh working-class neighborhood, the coldness and indifference of the racist system are shocking. The depth of Tony's anger speaks to the power of their growing friendship, as he begins to realize that Dr. Shirley's suffering is not just something that can be ignored or dismissed. It is a reality that Tony must reckon with, even if it forces him to confront the deeply entrenched racial biases within himself. However, what's striking in this section is how Dr. Shirley responds to the injustice. His reaction is not one of bitterness or outrage, even though the situation would warrant it. Instead, Dr. Shirley is calm and composed, and while his demeanor may seem emotionally detached, there's a quiet resilience in his response. He has learned to live with this kind of racism, but it does not mean it doesn't hurt. The emotional toll of this repeated rejection is evident in the way he silently bears the weight of it. This contrast between Tony's raw anger and Dr. Shirley's composed resignation highlights the emotional divide that still exists between them. It's a divide that they will both have to work through as they continue their journey together. As they leave the town, their shared experience in the face of segregation becomes a turning point in their relationship. Tony begins to open up more to Dr. Shirley about his own struggles, which include financial insecurity, the pressure of his family's expectations, and the deep sense of loyalty that binds him to his working-class roots. For Tony, Dr. Shirley is a complicated figure. On the one hand, he is a black man, and Tony is still grappling with his own racial prejudices. On the other hand, Dr. Shirley is a well-educated, highly cultured individual, a stark contrast to Tony's more rough-edged lifestyle. Yet as Tony shares more about his life, he begins to see in Dr. Shirley someone who, despite all their differences, is not so distant from him after all. The realization that Dr. Shirley, too, has struggled with expectations, loss, and the pressure of representing an entire race, humanizes him in Tony's eyes. He begins to see the vulnerability beneath the polished exterior that Dr. Shirley presents to the world. This shared understanding becomes the emotional core of Section 8. Both men are starting to see each other more clearly, not just as representatives of their respective identities, but as human beings with flaws, dreams, and fears. It is through these moments of mutual vulnerability that their friendship begins to transcend the limitations of race. Tony, who had once viewed Dr. Shirley primarily as an employer or an object of curiosity, now sees him as a full person. Dr. Shirley, in turn, begins to open up more to Tony, realizing that beneath Tony's rough exterior lies a man who, while far from perfect, is capable of deep loyalty, empathy, and compassion. Their differences still remain, but they are no longer the defining factors of their relationship. Instead, it's their shared humanity that binds them together. At the same time, the emotional complexity of the story is evident in how the film portrays Dr. Shirley's inner conflict. While Tony is experiencing a kind of awakening to the realities of racism, Dr. Shirley is dealing with his own set of challenges. One of the most profound struggles he faces in this section is his alienation from both black and white communities. He is often too elite or intellectual for the black community, which can see him as out of touch with the struggles they face. Conversely, he is rejected by the white community because of his race, regardless of his accomplishments. This sense of being caught between two worlds is a theme that continues to develop throughout the film, and it adds depth to Dr. Shirley's character. It's clear that while he is an incredibly talented musician, his ability to connect with others is compromised by the social expectations placed on him, and the constant othering that comes with being a black man in a racist society. For Tony, this realization is transformative. As their journey continues, Tony becomes more attuned to the complexities of Dr. Shirley's identity. He begins to see that Dr. Shirley's experiences go far beyond the surface-level struggles of race. There is also the emotional and psychological toll of constantly having to navigate the expectations of others. Tony's awareness of these layers adds a new dimension to his character, as he learns to appreciate the depth of Dr. Shirley's humanity. Therefore, serves as a crucial emotional turning point. It marks the moment when the two men stop simply enduring each other's presence and start to truly understand and support one another. 1. Their friendship, while still fragile in many ways, has begun to take root in a shared understanding of each other's pain, vulnerabilities, and strengths. This section is marked by moments of growth for both men as they learn, not just from each other, but from the painful realities of the world around them. It is in these moments of discomfort and realization that the film's deeper themes come into play, namely, the power of empathy and the importance of human connection in overcoming societal divides. As the section draws to a close, Tony and Dr. Shirley have made significant strides in their journey, not just across the southern states but toward a deeper, more meaningful friendship. While the road ahead is still fraught with challenges, the connection between them has begun to transcend the racial barriers that once separated them. Their bond is no longer just a product of necessity or circumstance. It is now rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and a recognition of the shared humanity that binds all people, regardless of race or background. In Section 9 of Green Book, the narrative builds on the emotional foundation established earlier in the film, taking the characters of Tony and Dr. Shirley through a pivotal and profound moment of transformation. By this point, their relationship has evolved from one of professional necessity to a true friendship. But this section delves deeper into their respective emotional journeys, further testing their understanding of each other and the complexities of the world they inhabit. This section begins with Tony and Dr. Shirley facing a critical crossroads in their journey, both literally and figuratively. Having already endured the injustices of the segregated South, the men find themselves at a point of emotional reckoning. They are now more than just two men traveling together. They have developed a mutual bond that transcends their initial differences. The growth of this bond, however, is not without its complications, and in Section 9, the film deftly portrays the emotional friction that arises when deep-seated fears and vulnerabilities surface. One of the key moments in this section occurs when the men face another instance of racism. Dr. Shirley, as a renowned pianist, is invited to perform at an exclusive venue. However, once again, the audience's reaction to him is colored by their racist assumptions. This time, the humiliation is not as immediate or public as in previous scenes, but it is no less painful. Dr. Shirley is forced to confront the fact that despite his immense talent and stature, his race continues to overshadow his achievements. This experience forces Dr. Shirley to reckon with a fundamental truth. Even as he rises above the expectations placed upon him, he is still held down by them. It is a realization that echoes through every stage of his life. The internal struggle he faces, torn between his desire to stand firm in his dignity and his weariness with the constant need to justify his worth, becomes an important theme of this section. For Tony, the emotional stakes are also elevated in this section. He has witnessed Dr. Shirley's pain before, but the weight of it hits him even harder now. Tony's loyalty to Dr. Shirley has grown immeasurably since the early days of their road trip, and his protective instinct begins to take over. He becomes determined to shield Dr. Shirley from further harm. But, this time, Tony's protectiveness also reveals his own vulnerability. Throughout their journey, Tony has played the role of the tough guy, a man who prides himself on his physical strength and his ability to handle adversity. However, watching Dr. Shirley struggle against the limitations imposed upon him because of his race forces Tony to confront his own insecurities. He begins to question his own place in the world, especially in relation to Dr. Shirley, whom he has come to admire deeply. Tony's feelings of inadequacy emerge as he realizes that he is not as immune to racism and prejudice as he once thought. The more Tony sees Dr. Shirley endure, the more Tony recognizes his own privilege and the emotional burdens that come with it. This realization is both eye-opening and uncomfortable for him, and it marks a key turning point in his character development. As the two men continue to travel together, their emotional intimacy deepens. The scenes in this section explore their growing understanding of one another through moments of quiet reflection and candid conversation. At times, their dialogue is filled with humor, as they continue to joke and banter with one another, but underlying their words is an unspoken respect and trust that has taken root. The connection between them, however, is not solely forged through moments of joy. It is through their shared moments of vulnerability and pain that their relationship truly deepens. Tony's emotional growth is particularly noticeable in this section, as he begins to shed the layers of cynicism and hardness that he had built around himself. He begins to see Dr. Shirley not just as a man of great intellect and talent, but as a friend who is struggling with the same kinds of feelings of isolation and vulnerability that he has. Tony starts to understand that being a man of honor is not about presenting oneself as invincible or without flaw, but about being open to the emotional realities of the world, and willing to do the hard work of being a supportive and empathetic friend. For Dr. Shirley, this section represents a time of self-reflection and re-evaluation of his own identity. He has long held himself to an impossibly high standard, striving for perfection in his work, his relationships, and his place in society. But, as the events of this section unfold, he is forced to confront the emotional costs of that perfectionism. Dr. Shirley's inner conflict becomes more pronounced as he grapples with the feeling that his career and his intellect have not shielded him from the harsh realities of racial prejudice. For the first time, he allows himself to show vulnerability to Tony, letting down the carefully constructed walls that have protected him from the world for so long. It is in these moments of vulnerability that Dr. Shirley reveals to Tony the extent to which he has suffered in silence throughout his life. This section also emphasizes the power of human connection in the face of adversity. As the two men share their most intimate thoughts, fears, and experiences, they begin to see each other not through the lens of race or class, but as individuals who are struggling to find their place in a world that often feels unforgiving. Tony, with his rough-and-tumble background, learns to recognize the depth of Dr. Shirley's emotional life, while Dr. Shirley, despite his initial reservations about Tony's lack of refinement, comes to see Tony as a man capable of great tenderness and empathy. As the section progresses, their bond becomes more palpable, as both men step outside of their respective comfort zones to truly support one another. Tony, who had once been dismissive of Dr. Shirley's world of high culture and intellectualism, now begins to admire and value these qualities in him. Meanwhile, Dr. Shirley, who had initially seen Tony as a mere chauffeur and an unrefined product of his working-class neighborhood, begins to appreciate the depth of Tony's character and his unwavering loyalty. They begin to see each other as equals, even though their experiences and backgrounds are vastly different. The culmination of this section occurs when Dr. Shirley, in a rare moment of complete emotional openness, allows himself to show his raw emotion. Tony, ever loyal and protective, is there to support him. The connection between them, forged through shared vulnerability, emerges as the heart of the film. It is not just the shared moments of humor or camaraderie that define their friendship, it is their ability to be present for each other in moments of true emotional difficulty. The film continues to explore the theme of racial divide, but it does so not through the lens of societal conflict alone, but through the personal, emotional journey of its characters. It is this emotional depth that sets Green Book apart from other films about race and prejudice. Rather than simply focusing on the political or social dimensions of the story, Green Book places its emphasis on the inner lives of its characters, showing how their experiences of race, identity, and friendship are intertwined. It is in these moments of connection, moments of shared vulnerability and emotional honesty, that the film's true power lies. Green Book marks a pivotal moment in the film, as Tony and Dr. Shirley's journey nears its end, and the impact of their time together becomes more evident. This section deals with a series of climactic events that solidify the emotional growth of both characters and demonstrate the profound influence they have had on each other. At the core of this section is a sense of realization, both for Tony and Dr. Shirley, about who they are, what they have become, and the importance of the bond they have formed. The beginning of section is marked by a powerful moment of clarity for Tony, who has been undergoing significant emotional and personal growth throughout the film. At the start of their journey, Tony was a man defined by crude humor, quick judgments, and a protective but somewhat superficial view of his role as Dr. Shirley's driver. However, as their trip progressed, Tony's view of the world began to expand. He saw beyond his own experiences and biases, and his relationship with Dr. Shirley allowed him to challenge his own assumptions about race, class, and human connection. In this section, Tony reaches a place where he has fully shed the hardened exterior he once wore, and he is now willing to openly embrace his own vulnerability. This emotional openness is crucial because it reflects his deeper understanding of the world around him, his empathy for others, and his realization of how much he has changed. He's no longer just a tough guy from the Bronx. He is a man who is capable of compassion and self-awareness. For Dr. Shirley, this section is just as transformative. Throughout the film, Dr. Shirley has maintained a careful distance from Tony and the world around him. He has been both a symbol of cultural refinement and a product of a harsh racial system that has forced him to constantly prove his worth. Yet, his time with Tony has allowed him to experience a form of companionship he had never thought possible. As their journey progressed, Dr. Shirley began to see Tony as more than just a driver. He saw him as a man with a heart, a man who, despite his rough edges, understood the true meaning of loyalty and friendship. In this section, Dr. Shirley reaches a place of emotional reconciliation, where he can finally allow himself to express gratitude and affection toward Tony without reservation. The transformation Dr. Shirley undergoes in this section is a culmination of his internal struggle, as he moves beyond the cultural expectations placed on him and finds peace with who he truly is. One of the most pivotal moments in section is when Dr. Shirley, after a deeply hurtful experience, makes a crucial decision regarding his career. It's a turning point that reflects both his frustration with the racial dynamics he has been subjected to and his evolving sense of agency. He has spent much of the film suppressing his emotions in order to maintain his status as an iconic pianist and intellectual figure, but in this section, he decides to confront the systemic inequalities head-on. It's a bold move that signifies his refusal to compromise his integrity and his desire to take control of his own narrative. This moment is significant not only for Dr. Shirley, but also for the film's broader commentary on racial inequality in the 1960s, showing how the personal and political are deeply intertwined. Tony's reaction to Dr. Shirley's decision is equally significant. His own evolution as a character is highlighted in this section, as he no longer reacts from a place of ignorance or defensiveness, but from a place of understanding and support. Throughout the film, Tony's character has been one of contrast. Tough on the outside but compassionate on the inside. However, in section, his external toughness begins to fade, and his deep care for Dr. Shirley becomes the driving force behind his actions. He becomes a true ally, standing by Dr. Shirley not only because he is his friend, but also because he understands the weight of what Dr. Shirley is going through. Tony's journey from ignorance to awareness is fully realized here, and his choice to support Dr. Shirley's bold decision is a testament to how far he has come. What makes this section particularly moving is the way it highlights the emotional intimacy that has developed between the two men. Their relationship has been through a series of phases, initially strained and transactional, then growing into mutual respect, and ultimately evolving into deep, unconditional friendship. Section 10 builds on this progression, showing how the two men's understanding of each other is now nuanced and profound. Dr. Shirley, once so distant and proud, now allows himself to be vulnerable in front of Tony, and Tony, who had once been hesitant to reveal his true feelings, now expresses his support without hesitation. The culmination of their relationship in this section is a powerful reminder that friendship is not just about shared experiences, but about the willingness to be open, to grow together, and to have each other's backs through even the most challenging of circumstances. The film's exploration of race continues to be a critical theme in this section, but it is not dealt with in the same overt manner as in earlier scenes. Instead of being framed as a matter of black versus white, the issue of race is now explored through the personal transformation of the two characters. Dr. Shirley and Tony are no longer just individuals caught in the machinery of racism, They are friends who have learned to see beyond their differences and embrace each other for who they truly are. This is the emotional heart of the film, the realization that, despite the harsh realities of the world they live in, it is still possible to find humanity and connection in unexpected places. As the section draws to a close, the men reach a moment of reconciliation, not just with each other, but with themselves. Dr. Shirley, having faced the pain of discrimination for so long, finally finds a way to assert his agency, while Tony, once so entrenched in his own biases, begins to shed the final layers of ignorance that had kept him distant from the realities of race and inequality. The emotional payoff of this section is immense, as the two men, who began as strangers on a journey, have now forged an unbreakable bond rooted in mutual respect, compassion, and understanding. In the final moments of section, the weight of the journey that has brought them here is fully felt. The film's examination of race, class, and identity has evolved into a story of profound personal transformation. What started as a road trip filled with conflict and discomfort has ended in an emotional embrace, a shared recognition of the growth they have undergone individually and together. Section 10 encapsulates the emotional core of Green Book, offering a poignant reminder that even in the face of deep-seated societal divisions, human connection can bridge the gaps between us. The relationship between Tony and Dr. Shirley has transcended its origins, and in this section it finds its fullest expression as a testament to the power of empathy, understanding, and the transformative nature of friendship. Green Book, the storyline reaches its emotional apex as the characters, Tony and Dr. Shirley, confront both the external challenges of the world around them and the internal conflicts that have shaped their identities and actions. By now, the film has skillfully woven together the narrative threads of race, class, personal growth, and the complexities of human relationships. This section in particular stands out because it represents a moment of reckoning for both men. It's a time when they must finally come to terms with the transformative nature of their bond and what they have learned about each other, about the world, and about themselves. The narrative in section hinges on two key themes: redemption and confrontation. For Tony, this is a time of introspection. Throughout the film, he has been portrayed as a man with a rough exterior, a man who reacts first and thinks later, often guided by his instincts and his biases. However, the events of the film have gradually opened his eyes to new perspectives, leading him to understand that much of his life has been shaped by assumptions he has made about people, race, and class. Section 11 marks the culmination of his internal struggle, a moment when he must grapple with the man he used to be and the man he is becoming. It is in this section that Tony begins to see the depth of his own limitations and the ways in which he has failed to fully grasp the weight of the racial dynamics at play. One of the most pivotal moments for Tony occurs when he has a deep conversation with his wife, Dolores. Their relationship has been a steady anchor throughout the film, with Dolores providing a grounding force for Tony's often chaotic life. However, in this section, Tony is confronted with the reality that, despite his deep love for her, there are parts of his identity and his past that he hasn't fully confronted. Dolores represents the old Tony, the man who would not question the racial and social conventions of the time. When Tony opens up to her about the lessons he has learned from Dr. Shirley, he begins to realize just how much he has changed. This realization hits him hard. It is clear that he has reached a crossroads, a point where his values are no longer defined by his upbringing, but by his own experiences. This moment of reflection is essential to Tony's character arc, because it marks the final stages of his transformation, from a man who sees the world in black and white terms, to someone who is learning to appreciate the complexities of the human experience. For Dr. Shirley, section represents a long-awaited moment of catharsis. Throughout the film, he has struggled with the limitations imposed on him by his race, constantly forced to prove himself to white audiences, to live up to the expectations of others, and to suppress his personal desires in favor of his career. Dr. Shirley is a brilliant pianist, but his brilliance is overshadowed by his constant struggle to navigate the deeply entrenched racial boundaries of the 1960s. He has long been forced to mask his pain, to bury his vulnerability beneath layers of politeness and reserve. But in Section 11, the toll of living this double life comes to a head. In a heart-wrenching moment of confrontation, Dr. Shirley lets down his guard and opens up to Tony, revealing the emotional and psychological burden he has carried for so long. This conversation between the two men is raw and revealing, as Dr. Shirley finally allows himself to express the anger, frustration, and deep sadness that has been building inside him. He shares the truth of what it means to live as a black man in a world that refuses to acknowledge his worth as anything other than an object of entertainment for the white masses. This vulnerable moment is both painful and powerful, as it marks Dr. Shirley's decision to no longer carry the weight of his isolation and pain alone. In sharing this emotional burden with Tony, he allows their bond to deepen in ways that were previously impossible. It is no longer just about two men navigating a professional relationship. It is about two individuals who are learning to see each other as full human beings, not defined by their external roles, but by their shared humanity. This moment also reflects the central theme of the film, the importance of human connection in overcoming the barriers that divide us. Dr. Shirley's willingness to open up to Tony represents a turning point in their relationship, one that solidifies their mutual respect and understanding. The tension that has been building throughout the film between the personal and the professional reaches its peak in Section 11. Tony and Dr. Shirley's journey together has been one of mutual learning, with both men challenging each other to expand their worldviews. However, the final test comes when they must face the most difficult moment of their journey together. After enduring numerous challenges, including physical and emotional violence from others, they must confront the painful realities of the world they live in, realities that neither of them can escape. The culmination of this confrontation is a poignant scene in which both men are forced to reckon with their roles in perpetuating the systems that have hurt them both. It's a moment of deep emotional resonance, one that forces them to confront not only the prejudice and inequality they face from society, but also the ways in which they have unintentionally perpetuated these systems through their own actions and beliefs. What makes Section so impactful is how it brings together the threads of personal growth, racial awareness, and friendship in a way that feels entirely earned. The conversations between Tony and Dr. Shirley are not just words, they are moments of real emotional intimacy, where both men put down their walls and allow themselves to be fully seen for the first time. This vulnerability is what makes their relationship so powerful. It's not just about two men sharing a ride. It's about two human beings who, despite their vastly different experiences and backgrounds, are learning to understand, empathize, and support one another in ways that transcend the limitations of their circumstances. By the end of Section, the emotional arc of the film has come full circle. Tony and Dr. Shirley, once strangers, are now deeply connected, their bond stronger than ever. Dr. Shirley has faced his own demons and allowed himself to be vulnerable, while Tony has confronted his biases and learned the true value of empathy and friendship. They have both grown immeasurably from their experiences together, and this section marks the moment where their relationship, forged in adversity, finally finds its fullest expression. The film's use of the road trip as a metaphor for personal growth is on full display in Section 11, as both characters experience the final leg of their journey, one that is not just about reaching a physical destination, but about realizing that the journey itself has been transformative. For Tony, Dr. Shirley has become not just a client or a colleague, but a friend and a mentor. For Dr. Shirley, Tony has become more than just a driver. He is a confidant, someone who has shown him that it is possible to form genuine human connections, even in a world that often tries to keep people divided. Their bond is one that transcends the boundaries of race, class, and circumstance, and it is this relationship that forms the emotional backbone of Green Book. Section 11 solidifies this relationship, marking a moment of growth and understanding that will stay with both men long after their journey has ended. Green Book, the film begins to reach its poignant conclusion. This section explores the aftermath of the challenges Tony and Dr. Shirley have faced throughout their journey, reflecting on the deep transformations both men have undergone. As the story nears its end, the two characters begin to reconcile not only with each other, but also with the larger forces that have shaped their lives. and their relationship. This section is crucial in demonstrating how their bond has evolved and the lasting impact of their friendship. It's a moment of reflection, acceptance, and, ultimately, understanding. At the start of this section, Tony has returned to his family, and Dr. Shirley has completed his tour. Their time apart allows both men to process their experiences, and it also sets the stage for their final confrontation with the broader racial and social realities they inhabit. Tony's return home marks a shift for him. He is no longer the man who left his wife and children with the same narrow mindset. He has learned to see the world through a different lens. The experiences of being Dr. Shirley's driver, traveling across the South, and witnessing firsthand the kind of prejudice and violence that Dr. Shirley faced, have deeply impacted him. These experiences have also taught him to reconsider his own assumptions about race, identity, and humanity. One of the key developments in section is the growth Tony experiences within his family dynamic. At the beginning of the film, Tony is portrayed as a man who is primarily motivated by a desire to provide for his family. His world revolves around protecting his loved ones, but his methods are often colored by his own biases and limited perspective. However, upon his return, Tony begins to engage more openly with his family, particularly with his wife, Dolores. Their conversations reflect the subtle yet powerful changes in his character. In contrast to his earlier self, Tony is now able to recognize his own faults and shortcomings. He acknowledges that his relationship with Dolores has been defined by a lack of communication and emotional distance, and he is eager to mend that. This shift in Tony's character speaks to the larger theme of personal transformation that has been woven throughout the film. While Tony is at home, we also see Dr. Shirley in a state of deep introspection. Having spent most of the film navigating the world of white society, often at great personal cost, Dr. Shirley has been forced to suppress his emotions and desires in order to survive. His relationship with Tony has allowed him to express his vulnerabilities more openly than he has in years, but now that the tour is over, Dr. Shirley finds himself facing the same isolation and pain he had known before. However, this time he is not as resigned to it. Section 12 delves into Dr. Shirley's realization that despite the barriers of race and class, he is worthy of love and respect. This moment of self-acceptance is critical to the film's exploration of racial identity. Dr. Shirley no longer views himself solely through the lens of societal expectations. He begins to understand that his worth is not defined by the approval of others, but by his own self-understanding and the connections he has made along the way. Despite the personal growth both men have experienced, they must also confront the lingering social challenges they face. Dr. Shirley's life, for all its professional success, has been shaped by a racial system that has continuously relegated him to a secondary status, regardless of his talents or intellect. In section we see how this societal structure continues to impact him. His success as a pianist has not shielded him from the pervasive racism of the world. It has only made him more aware of the contradictions and the pain inherent in his position. He continues to live in a world where his skin color determines his worth, no matter how hard he works or how much he achieves. This theme of racial identity and its implications for the individual is explored further in the interactions between Tony and Dr. Shirley. The two men's relationship has grown over the course of the film, but the dynamics between them remain complex. Tony's realization that his views on race have been shaped by ignorance and privilege is a significant part of his transformation. He has gone from seeing Dr. Shirley as an enigmatic figure to understanding him as a full, complex person, a man with a life of his own, filled with pain and joy, accomplishments and failures. However, Tony's understanding of Dr. Shirley's world remains limited by the reality of their racial divide. He has learned to be an ally, but he cannot fully empathize with the unique challenges Dr. Shirley faces as a black man in a racially divided society. This tension between their friendship and the societal forces they cannot escape is a powerful element of the narrative in Section 12. As Dr. Shirley struggles with his place in the world, Tony's actions speak to his evolving understanding of the need for support and solidarity across racial lines. Tony, having experienced Dr. Shirley's pain firsthand, understands now more than ever the importance of offering not just sympathy, but active allyship. This shift in Tony's attitude reflects the changing dynamics of their relationship. Where once they were simply driver and passenger, they are now true friends. Men who have shared not just a road trip, but an emotional journey. Their friendship, forged in the heat of adversity, is the emotional core of the film, and Section 12 highlights the ways in which they support each other in their respective struggles. The conclusion of Section offers a sense of resolution, though it is not without its lingering tensions. Dr. Shirley's decision to return to his life as a renowned pianist, despite the racial barriers he faces, speaks to his acceptance of the reality of his world. He has found a way to navigate it on his own terms, using his music as a vehicle for expression and connection. Meanwhile, Tony's return to his family marks the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He is not the same man who left, and while his relationship with his wife is far from perfect, it is clear that their bond has deepened. In a small but significant gesture, Tony begins to take more responsibility for his role in his family's life, reflecting the positive changes in his character. The film concludes on a note of bittersweet triumph, with Tony and Dr. Shirley having each come to terms with their personal journeys. They are both changed men, stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. However, the challenges they face as individuals are far from over. The racial divisions in society, the pressures of expectation, and the struggles of daily life remain. But Tony and Dr. Shirley have learned to navigate them with a greater sense of understanding and empathy. Section, ultimately, is about the quiet strength that comes with transformation and the recognition that while we cannot change the world around us, we can change ourselves, and in doing so, we change the way we interact with others. Green Book focuses on the culmination of the characters' journeys, particularly the profound change in their relationship. By this point in the movie, the growing mutual respect and understanding between Tony and Dr. Shirley have come full circle, revealing just how much they have learned from one another. This section serves as a resolution for both characters, offering a glimpse of the transformative impact their experiences together have had on their personal lives and perspectives. The emotional weight of this section hinges on Tony's return to his home and family, where his time on the road has granted him a new perspective on life, his marriage, and what it means to be a better person. When Tony arrives back in the Bronx, it is clear that he is no longer the same man who left weeks earlier. The experiences he shared with Dr. Shirley on their tour across the South have shaped him into someone who has a greater understanding of the prejudices faced by African Americans. It's through these encounters that Tony comes to realize his own biases and learns how to make meaningful changes in how he sees the world. At the core of Tony's transformation is his relationship with his wife, Dolores. When he arrives back home, his initial behavior is more attuned to the emotional distance that had defined their relationship in the past. However, it is evident that the time away has caused Tony to reflect deeply on the way he interacts with his family. He starts taking ownership of his shortcomings, not just as a husband but also as a man trying to navigate an increasingly complicated world. One significant moment in this section is when Tony apologizes to Dolores for the past, for his role in taking her for granted, and for the times he failed to communicate. It's clear that Tony has learned that love and respect are not one-sided, and this moment of honesty and openness is a crucial turning point in his personal journey. While Tony's homecoming is a step forward, Dr. Shirley's path is somewhat more complicated. Having spent much of his life navigating the elite circles of the music world, Dr. Shirley is now back in the reality of his existence, still a prominent figure but increasingly isolated because of the racial barriers that surround him. His return from the tour marks a quieter but no less profound moment of reflection. Dr. Shirley has had to suppress his identity in many ways, adapting to the expectations and prejudices of those around him in order to maintain his career. But during his journey with Tony, he has been afforded moments of vulnerability and humanity that he had long since learned to hide. He is no longer the enigmatic figure that Tony first encountered at the beginning of the film. Instead, Dr. Shirley is now more aware of his self-worth, and the toll that living in a world that devalues him has taken on his spirit. Though he is still constrained by the structural racism that exists in every aspect of his life, he begins to find a sense of peace in accepting who he is, rather than seeking approval from those who will never understand him. The dynamics between the two men evolve as well in this section. When they first met, Tony saw Dr. Shirley as an intellectual and social curiosity, someone he didn't fully understand or relate to. Over time, Tony has come to realize that Dr. Shirley's life, while vastly different from his own, is deeply affected by the same human struggles: loneliness, rejection, and the desire for respect. What had once been a transactional relationship, driver and passenger, has evolved into a genuine friendship built on trust and mutual understanding. The realization that they both share a deep yearning for connection in a world full of divisions strengthens the bond between them. One of the most telling moments of this section is when Dr. Shirley arrives at Tony's home. It's a quiet but emotional scene. For the first time in the film, Dr. Shirley is welcomed into a space where he is not just tolerated or seen as a spectacle, but fully embraced as a person worthy of respect and affection. It is a small but significant moment of affirmation for Dr. Shirley, who has spent most of his life being viewed through the lens of his race and status as a celebrity. This act of acceptance, both by Tony and by Tony's family, symbolizes the film's larger message. It is possible to transcend the limits of racial prejudice, even if the world around you remains filled with obstacles. The simple act of inviting Dr. Shirley into the warmth of his home is a subtle but profound gesture of solidarity. As much as this section focuses on the transformation of the two central characters, it also points to the broader social changes taking place during the time period in which the film is set. The civil rights movement was in full swing during the 1960s, and Dr. Shirley's journey is one that directly intersects with the larger fight for racial equality. However, Green Book does not frame this story as a typical historical drama about the civil rights movement. Instead, it uses the personal experiences of Tony and Dr. Shirley to underscore the humanity behind the headlines. While Dr. Shirley's success as a pianist makes him a celebrity in his own right, it does not shield him from the systemic racism that defines his world. His struggle is both personal and political. In this way, Section 13 brings the broader socio-political context of the era into sharper focus. The contrast between Tony and Dr. Shirley's lives in this section speaks to the film's theme of transformation. Tony's character arc represents the possibility of personal growth, even for someone entrenched in a mindset shaped by prejudice and narrow views of the world. His transformation is not immediate, nor is it without struggle. But the film demonstrates that change is possible, even for those who may not initially seem capable of it. On the other hand, Dr. Shirley's journey is more about survival in a world that refuses to fully accept him. While Tony's experiences teach him the importance of empathy, Dr. Shirley's arc is one of learning to navigate the emotional cost of success in a world that consistently devalues his worth. Both characters arrive at a point in section where they have found a deeper sense of meaning in their lives, though their paths to that realization are distinctly different. For Tony, this moment marks the completion of his transformation from a man who lived by his biases to one who is open to changing not only his perspective, but his actions. For Dr. Shirley, it is the acknowledgement that his worth is not tied to how others perceive him, but to how he sees himself. It is a hard-earned sense of dignity and pride that he has fought for every step of the way. This section closes with a sense of hope. Although the film doesn't suggest that the world has suddenly become a better place, it does imply that through the connections we make with others, we can create pockets of change, however small. Tony and Dr. Shirley's journey together serves as a powerful reminder that human connections, rooted in empathy, respect, and understanding, can transcend even the most rigid societal boundaries. It is this message that gives the film its enduring emotional resonance, and Section 13 is where these themes come together in their fullest, most poignant expression. Green Book brings the emotional journey of both Tony and Dr. Shirley to its most poignant resolution, offering a reflective and hopeful conclusion to the story of their unexpected but transformative friendship. By this stage in the film, both characters have experienced significant personal growth, having been challenged in ways that not only changed how they see each other, but also how they see themselves and the world around them. This section underscores the overarching theme of the film, that change is possible, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against us. The journey is not linear, nor is it without its struggles, but it is ultimately about progress towards understanding, empathy, and respect. At the heart of this section is Tony's final transformation from a man entrenched in his prejudices to someone who has learned the value of respect for others, irrespective of race, background, or social class. Throughout their journey together, Tony has been exposed to numerous realities that forced him to confront his own biases, assumptions, and limited worldview. These moments of discomfort, often precipitated by encounters with racism and injustice, were the catalyst for Tony's growth. From the beginning, he viewed Dr. Shirley as an intellectual oddity, someone entirely separate from his own rough-and-tumble life. However, as the two men continued their travels, their shared experiences and mutual respect blossomed, allowing Tony to realize the deep, complex humanity of the person he had once viewed as other. The climax of Tony's arc comes when he acknowledges his flaws and makes an active choice to be a better person, not just for himself, but for those around him. His decision to step outside of his comfort zone, both in his relationship with Dr. Shirley and his home life, marks the culmination of the changes that have occurred over the course of the film. Tony's growth isn't just about embracing Dr. Shirley as a friend, it's about challenging the narrow definitions of masculinity, success, and race that had previously defined his worldview. The film subtly reveals that Tony, as an Italian-American working-class man, had lived much of his life adhering to the unspoken rules of his community, where the harshness of the streets often necessitated a hardened persona. Yet, through his bond with Dr. Shirley, Tony discovers that vulnerability and empathy do not equate to weakness. This realization empowers him to embrace a more nuanced and open-minded perspective. In contrast, Dr. Shirley's journey is one of quiet resilience. He has long been a figure who has had to suppress parts of his identity to succeed in a world that demands conformity. As a celebrated African-American pianist, he has faced the constant tension of living between two worlds: the world of his art, where he is admired, and the world of society, where he is relegated to the status of second-class citizen because of his race. For much of the film, Dr. Shirley has been an enigmatic figure, someone who hides behind his dignity and grace, but is deeply affected by the racial prejudice and social isolation that have marked his life. Throughout his journey with Tony, Dr. Shirley has been forced to confront his own feelings of loneliness and estrangement, both within his professional circles and in his personal life. However, in section, Dr. Shirley begins to find a sense of peace within himself. He has come to accept that his worth is not contingent on society's perception of him or the status he has attained. Instead, it is grounded in his self-respect and the values that have guided him throughout his life. In the final moments of the film, Dr. Shirley is able to lean into the affection and acceptance Tony and his family offer, recognizing that he does not have to live in isolation or fear of judgment. Dr. Shirley's journey is ultimately one of self-acceptance, a journey that has not been easy, but one that is filled with quiet, powerful moments of triumph. His relationship with Tony serves as a catalyst for this change, as their friendship has allowed him to experience moments of genuine humanity, free from the constant expectations of the public and the burdens of racial discrimination. The resolution of their friendship is also marked by an understanding of the broader social context in which their relationship exists. Green Book does not shy away from depicting the systemic racism that pervades the American South during the 1960s. The racial prejudices and exclusionary practices that Tony and Dr. Shirley encounter on their tour are a stark reminder of the era's divisiveness. But through their shared experiences, the film shows that it is possible to build bridges across these divides, one person at a time. The film does not offer a grand solution to racism, but instead focuses on the small, everyday acts of kindness, empathy, and mutual respect that have the potential to dismantle the walls that divide us. By the end of Section 14, both characters have transcended the limitations imposed by their society and their friendship becomes a testament to the power of human connection in overcoming prejudice. Another critical aspect of this section is the film's exploration of the theme of family. For Tony, family is an essential part of his identity, and it is through his growing understanding of his own family that he comes to appreciate the importance of empathy in building relationships. At the start of the film, Tony is disconnected from his family in many ways. His marriage to Dolores has become strained, and his relationship with his children is more transactional than emotional. But by the end of the film, Tony has come to understand that the key to a meaningful life lies not in external success or wealth, but in the strength of his personal relationships. His reconciliation with Dolores, his embrace of his family's warmth, and his decision to take ownership of his mistakes all speak to his desire to build stronger, more compassionate connections. In Dr. Shirley's case, his relationship with family is more complicated. Throughout the film, he is shown to be a solitary figure, estranged from the family members who could have offered him support. His complex feelings about race, privilege, and success have distanced him from those who might understand him best. But by the end of the film, Dr. Shirley begins to recognize the importance of allowing himself to be loved and accepted. His reunion with Tony's family symbolizes a crucial moment in his life, one where he no longer needs to hide his identity or suppress his feelings. This understanding of the value of family is a powerful thematic element in the conclusion of the film. As Green Book reaches its final moments, the audience is left with a sense of hope. The film does not offer a perfect resolution, nor does it pretend that the world has changed overnight. However, it affirms that meaningful change is possible, if not in the grand societal sense, then at least in the small, personal spaces where individuals come together to understand and support one another. Through Tony and Dr. Shirley's unlikely but powerful friendship, the film offers a moving reminder that even in the face of deep social divisions, human connections can transcend barriers and create the possibility of transformation. Section 14 highlights this powerful message, leaving the audience with the understanding that change begins with each individual, and that the path toward a more compassionate world starts with empathy and respect. As Green Book draws to its close, the final section of the film serves not only as a resolution to the story of Tony and Dr. Shirley's transformative journey, but also as a powerful commentary on the broader themes of racism, friendship, and the human capacity for growth. In Section 15, the film's emotional and narrative arcs reach their peak, culminating in a series of touching moments that encapsulate the deep changes both characters have undergone. This section does not merely close the story, but reinforces the film's message about the importance of connection, self-awareness, and the breaking down of prejudice, all framed within the context of personal, familial, and societal transformation. At its core, section is about the quiet power of reconciliation between two men from completely different backgrounds who, through their shared experiences, have come to understand each other on a profoundly personal level. It's in this final section that the idea of growth and evolution becomes most clear. Both Tony and Dr. Shirley have changed over the course of the film, and this section illustrates that their friendship is not just about overcoming obstacles, it's about building something new and lasting. It is through the lens of their relationship that we see the true meaning of empathy, where each character not only learns to respect the other's differences, but also discovers the strength to confront their own vulnerabilities. Tony's personal growth comes to the forefront as he embraces a new understanding of the world and of himself. As the film reaches its conclusion, Tony has come to appreciate the complexities of Dr. Shirley's life and experiences. What began as a relationship born out of necessity, Tony needing a job and Dr. Shirley needing a driver, has evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. By now, Tony no longer sees Dr. Shirley merely as a client or a wealthy intellectual figure. He sees him as a person with flaws, dreams, and a humanity that transcends race, class, and the other societal divisions that once separated them. The journey that Tony embarks upon with Dr. Shirley has forced him to challenge the biases that shaped his worldview for most of his life, and this section showcases his internal shift. The true depth of Tony's transformation is revealed through his interactions with his family, particularly his wife, Dolores. Throughout the film, Tony's relationship with Dolores has been strained. While he deeply loves his family, his values and actions were often misaligned with the kind of life his wife envisioned for them. His violent outbursts, his casual racism, and his inability to express vulnerability had created distance between them. However, by the end of the film, Tony is more attuned to the emotional needs of those around him. The final scenes show Tony in a moment of quiet reflection, where he recognizes the importance of his familial relationships and acknowledges that love requires growth, humility, and understanding. His emotional maturity, particularly as it manifests in his relationship with Dolores, marks a significant milestone in his character development. Dr. Shirley's transformation in Section is equally profound, though it manifests in different ways. For much of the film, Dr. Shirley has been emotionally isolated, both by choice and by the external pressures of racism and classism. While he has achieved great success as a world-renowned pianist, this success has come at the cost of his personal happiness and emotional well-being. Dr. Shirley's journey is one of self-acceptance and vulnerability. He has always been the epitome of grace under pressure, an icon of dignity in a world that continually seeks to diminish him. But as the film progresses, he starts to reveal the emotional scars that come with living in a world that does not accept him for who he truly is. By the time Section unfolds, Dr. Shirley has allowed himself to be more open with Tony, showing moments of raw emotion and vulnerability. Their friendship, which began with hesitation and tension, has blossomed into something that transcends the initial awkwardness. In the final scenes, we see Dr. Shirley, not just as a musician or a symbol of African American excellence, but as a human being who has struggled with isolation, pain, and fear. It is through his relationship with Tony that he begins to let go of the armor he has worn for so long. He allows himself to be seen in his entirety, flaws and all, and in doing so, he finds peace. Dr. Shirley's ability to let down his guard is a powerful moment, not just in the context of his personal journey, but also as a reminder of the importance of allowing ourselves to be loved and accepted, even in our most vulnerable states. The final moments of Green Book focus on the idea of homecoming. For Tony, this is a return to his family with a new sense of self, one that is more in tune with the emotional needs of those around him. For Dr. Shirley, it's a realization that he can now move forward, not alone, but with a friend by his side. The metaphor of the Green Book, the travel guide that helped African Americans navigate the dangers of segregation, becomes a symbol of the journey they've both undertaken, a journey that leads to a place where people can be seen for who they truly are, without the burden of societal expectations and prejudices weighing them down. The film ends on a note of hope and optimism. It does not present a perfect world. Racial tensions and prejudice are still pervasive, as evidenced by the many hardships both Tony and Dr. Shirley face. However, it does suggest that change is possible. The quiet, unspoken understanding that emerges between the two men in the final moments is a testament to the power of individual transformation. If two people from such starkly different worlds can come together and form a genuine bond, then there is hope for broader societal change as well. Through their journey, Tony and Dr. Shirley not only come to understand each other, but also become agents of change in their own lives. The film suggests that while large-scale societal transformation may seem out of reach, personal change, driven by empathy, respect, and the willingness to confront one's own biases, is within everyone's grasp. But this idea of change, both personal and societal, is the core of Section 15, leaving viewers with a sense of hope for the future. As the credits roll, the audience is left with the image of two men who have come to see each other as equals, as friends, and as people who have shared in each other's struggles. The film's closing moments are a reminder that true growth often comes from the most unexpected places. And just as the Green Book once served as a guide to safety for African American travelers, the final scenes of the film act as a guide to emotional safety, suggesting that the path to personal growth and understanding is often found through human connection. Ultimately, Green Book is a film about the quiet but profound moments of connection that have the power to change lives. By the end of Section 15, the audience has witnessed two people who at one point might have never imagined they could understand each other, find common ground. The film leaves us with a message that, no matter the obstacles, human connections can transcend societal boundaries, and through empathy and understanding, we can create a more just and compassionate world. Green Book, directed by Peter Farrelly, is a film that delves deep into the complexities of friendship, racism, and personal growth. Inspired by true events, the movie tells the story of a working-class Italian-American, Tony Lip, played by Viggo Mortensen, who is hired to drive an African-American pianist, Dr. Don Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali, on a concert tour through the racially segregated South in the 1960s. This unexpected journey not only changes the course of their lives, but also offers a powerful examination of human connection, empathy, and the subtle yet pervasive nature of racism. From the very beginning, the film draws the audience in with its authentic depiction of Tony's life in the Bronx, where he's caught up in the struggles of a working-class existence. His tough exterior and crude sense of humor make him an unlikely hero, but as the movie progresses, we see that beneath the surface lies a man capable of transformation. Mortensen's portrayal of Tony is full of heart and humor, providing a well-balanced character that is both relatable and complex. Dr. Shirley, on the other hand, is an enigmatic figure, a highly educated and gifted musician who is uncomfortable in the environment of the South, where racial segregation is enforced and blatant prejudice is an everyday reality. Mahershala Ali's performance is nothing short of brilliant, capturing the internal turmoil and dignity of a man who is constantly caught between his status as a talented artist and his experience as a black man in a world that discriminates against him. The central tension in the film revolves around the unlikely friendship that forms between Tony and Dr. Shirley. At the outset, they seem to be worlds apart. Tony, with his blue-collar upbringing, and Dr. Shirley, a sophisticated intellectual, could not be more different. However, as their journey unfolds, they begin to understand each other on a deeper level, revealing that empathy, mutual respect, and kindness can bridge even the most seemingly insurmountable divides. The journey is not just geographical. Through their travels, both characters embark on a journey of personal growth, shedding their preconceived notions about race, class, and human potential. The screenplay is sharp and filled with moments of levity that balance the film's heavier themes. The humorous interactions between Tony and Dr. Shirley are an essential part of the movie's charm, providing the emotional space necessary for the audience to absorb the more serious subject matter. The film's pacing is well considered, allowing for moments of tension and humor to coalesce, which ultimately leads to an emotional payoff. What makes Green Book stand out is its ability to weave historical context with intimate character moments. It never feels preachy or overly heavy-handed, even when addressing difficult topics like racial discrimination. Instead, it invites the viewer into the character's world, showing how they evolve, adapt, and change through their interactions. It's a film that gently challenges its audience to rethink their biases and assumptions, while reminding us of the enduring power of friendship. Director Peter Farrelly, best known for his work in comedic films like Dumb and Dumber, approaches the material with sensitivity, seamlessly blending humor and drama. His direction highlights the humanity of both Tony and Dr. Shirley, giving space for their vulnerabilities and growth to take center stage. One of the strongest aspects of the film is its examination of racism and how it manifests in both overt and subtle ways. The segregated South serves as the backdrop for many of the film's most emotional moments, as Tony and Dr. Shirley face various challenges, from unsanitary conditions to outright hostility. Through these experiences, the film explores the complex layers of systemic racism and the personal struggles of both characters as they navigate a divided America. The performances of Mortensen and Ali are nothing short of exceptional. Mortensen's portrayal of Tony Lip is both comedic and heartwarming, while Ali brings a quiet intensity to his role as Dr. Shirley, showing the deep emotional scars that come from living in a world that refuses to see you as an equal. The chemistry between the two actors is palpable, and their relationship is the heart and soul of the film. Green Book won several accolades, including the Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Supporting Actor for Mahershala Ali. The film resonated with audiences and critics alike, thanks to its honest portrayal of racial tensions, but also its emphasis on the transformative power of friendship. The movie's visual aesthetic complements its themes perfectly, with the lush cinematography highlighting the stark contrast between the bustling city life of the North and the quiet, oppressive atmosphere of the segregated South. The film score, featuring music by Chris Bowers, further enhances the emotional resonance, particularly in scenes where Dr. Shirley's piano performances underscore the emotional gravity of the narrative. Ultimately, Green Book is a film about bridging divides. It's about how two people from completely different walks of life can learn to understand, respect, and care for each other, even in the face of adversity. In doing so, it offers a poignant reminder of the importance of empathy, compassion, and the capacity for growth in overcoming the prejudices that divide us. Thanks so much for watching our review of Green Book. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more movie reviews and insights. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What did you think of Green Book? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't seen the film yet, we highly recommend checking it out. It's a beautiful story of friendship, transformation, and the power of empathy. Until you can keep.